Welcome, everyone. Welcome to the White Mountain Education Sunday broadcast. Today, I'm going to be talking about what is consciousness. So let me start with a very sweet story. Nasruddin, the wise fool, was wandering the marketplace when he bumped into a scholar, his brow furrowed in deep thought. "What troubles you, learned one?" Nasruddin inquired, tilting his head. "I am contemplating the nature of consciousness," the scholar replied, his voice heavy with the weight of the universe. "This awareness, this sense of self, where does it reside? Is it a product of the physical brain or something more ethereal, something divine?" Nasruddin chuckled, a mischievous glint in his eye. He picked up a pomegranate from a nearby stall, its ruby red skin glistening in the sun. "Tell me, my friend," he said, holding the fruit aloft, "where does the sweetness of this pomegranate reside? Is it in the seeds, in the juice, in the skin? Or is it in the experience, the moment it touches your tongue and explodes with flavor?" The scholar, perplexed, could only stammer in response. Nasruddin smiled, a knowing twinkle in his eye. "Consciousness, my friend, is like the sweetness of the pomegranate. It is not a thing to be found, but an experience to be lived." And here's another story about a young monk, new to the spiritual path and new to thought, who wanted information about suffering and consciousness. Because the monk was young, the master didn't give the young one a complex or an advanced answer, but sent him on a journey toward awakening the young one's consciousness. The young monk, plagued by doubts, approached his master, and with a troubled heart, "Master," he implored, "I am lost in a sea of thoughts and sensations. How can I find true peace, true understanding of this consciousness that seems to bind me to suffering?" The master smiled serenely and led the monk to a nearby stream. "Tell me," he says, "what do you see?" The monk, perplexed, replied, "Well, I see the water flowing, master. I see leaves falling and fish darting beneath the surface." The master nodded. "And what is it that sees?" The monk paused, his mind grappling with the question. "It is my consciousness, master," he finally answered, "my awareness." "Indeed," the master affirmed. "But tell me, where is this consciousness? How can you grasp it? How can you hold it in your hand?" The monk fell silent, realizing the futility of his pursuit. The master gently placed a hand on his shoulder. "Consciousness, my pupil, is like the stream, ever changing, ever flowing. It is not a thing to be grasped, but a process to be understood. Cease your struggle to possess it and simply observe its flow. In that observation, you will find peace." So the term consciousness, this is a term that's often debated in spiritual and philosophical movements and communities. The two communities of thought rarely reach agreeing conclusions. Yet the teachings of hierarchy, which are given to us through Helena Rourke, H.B. Blavatsky, Alice Bailey, and more recently Torkim Saradarian, define and explain consciousness to us in scientific terms. Their teachings give scientific explanations in practical and expansive spiritual and psychological ways. So during today's Sunday talk, I will be sharing in such a way that I will clarify what consciousness is and what it means to us personally as spiritual beings. So let me begin with this. Consciousness has its core. The core is your human soul. Consciousness has its core, and the core is your human soul. Consciousness is your soul's light. The more expansive your consciousness is, the more radiatory your light. The ancients have told us that consciousness was always in existence in everything. The next point about consciousness is that it is a state of beingness that you, that myself, that everybody must experience. Beingness is the percentage of your construction, the construction of your soul. It's an important definition to think about and really dig deeply into. What does it mean, the percentage of the construction of your soul? That beingness is the percentage of construction of your soul. Think about it. So the more complete the construction or unfoldment of our soul, the greater the light of our consciousness. Okay, so how does one experience consciousness? How does one experience consciousness? Through creativity. Isn't that interesting? I found it very interesting. Creating is like a river that never stops and goes into infinity. So to create means to take an idea and to put it into form. Not just a dense physical form, but finer, into finer matter in which your ideas slowly descend and develop and eventually become tangible. For example, before the idea of the White Mountain moved into tangible form, it was first an idea. As the idea began moving closer and closer into consciousness, activities to bring the idea into form took place. And that process continues even today, while the light of the group consciousness and beingness expands. So to understand how such a process happens is to understand that consciousness has many levels. It operates on many levels. For example, our brain consciousness, astral and mental consciousnesses. But some people also have intuitional awareness, triadal awareness, monadic awareness, and awareness of the self. At the same time, brain consciousness, astral consciousness, and the lower mental consciousness can prevent advanced thinking. Now, I'm throwing a lot out at you here, so you might want to listen to this talk today a couple of times, which will be on YouTube later on today. So let me repeat this, that brain consciousness, astral consciousness, and lower mental consciousness can prevent advanced thinking. It can also prevent the full manifestation of an idea, a higher idea. So what prevents advanced thinking and higher ideas from manifesting? Illusion, glamours, doubt, the inability to think clearly, brain diseases, mental health disorders, severe drug and alcohol abuse, and so forth. All of these elements prevent advanced thinking. On the subject of creativity and consciousness, Nicholas Roerich, the master artist, wrote, "The awareness of beauty will save the world." What does this mean to us? It is through beauty that we, as souls, must begin to create. We must strive to bring higher ideas from higher planes of consciousness into this world, into perfect formation. In a lecture to some Bombay students in an art school, Professor Nicholas, as he was frequently called, said, "Very often we are trying to discover how to build the next life, how to build the evolution to come." Well, he was talking here about the continuity of life. He explained, this is our duty. As you will all very soon wish to build up your own lives, and certainly you will wish to build up a happy life. What is the best medium, he says, to reach this happiness? He said, fortunately, after visiting more than 25 countries, imagine 100 years ago what was required to visit 25 countries. He said, "I can tell you from my own experience, only through the beautiful. We are divided in so many experiences, yet this feeling of the beautiful is everywhere." You note that I am speaking about the sense of the beautiful. And it is our duty to introduce this general sense of this great conception into our lives. That sense of the beautiful is the light of your soul, the light of your consciousness. The greater the light of your consciousness, the greater the sense of beautiful. Nicholas Roerich said, "Perhaps someone might ask me, well, it is very good to have such a dream, to make life somehow beautiful. We often think that this beauty is only for those who are rich, or he who must work, how can he dream about the beautiful?" And certainly we all have need of this dream about the beautiful. This dream he was talking about was about the higher worlds of consciousness, the intuitional or the triadal consciousness. In summary, he said, the chief thing is to have an inner sense of the beautiful. Do you see, he was giving his students a vision of their future, which was to construct the intuitional and triadal awareness. So I was thinking as I was sitting here and Val was leading us in the meditation to the beautiful, and I imagined my teacher, Torquem, and Helena Rourke and myself, all three of us walking and climbing up to the top of the Himalayan mountains, the Himalayan mountain range. It was beautiful. It was a beautiful envision of the future. Have an inner sense of the beautiful. So when we have achieved super consciousness, which means when your consciousness has a major expansion, you develop continuity of consciousness. Not in a sense of higher direction only, but also in the sense of the continuity with experiences. So it's very important to think about the sense of continuity with your experiences. This is the past and the future, and they are united in the present. A young monk, plagued by doubts, approached his master with a troubled heart. "Master," he implored, "I am lost in a sea of thoughts and sensation. How can I find true peace, true understanding of this consciousness that does seem to bind me to suffering?" The master smiled serenely and led the monk to a nearby stream. "Tell me," he said, "what do you see?" The monk, perplexed, replied, "Well, I see the water flowing, master. I see leaves falling and fish darting beneath the surface." And the master nodded and he said, "And what is it that it sees?" The monk paused, his mind grappling with the question. "It is my consciousness." He finally answered, "It is my awareness." So our consciousness contains all experiences of our past lives. See, the river of life, the continuity of life. And this is why I wanted to share that story twice. It is an accumulative light that grows and expands, but also it contracts. Our consciousness in that light can contract and shrink, and it can petrify as a person forces it to operate against its own laws, against its principles, against its standards. It's like taking that river and blocking it with trees falling down and debris building up around the tree and the base of the tree and the limbs of the tree until finally the river no longer flows. This, what happens is when we work against the light of our soul, when we work against our consciousness, against the laws and principles and standards of the light of our soul. If such a thing happens, it often leads the soul into gross materialism and pleasure-seeking efforts. For a long time, the evolution of the person will be delayed. This is why great ones advise us to be very cautious and not force our nature by trying to engage in advanced meditation or religious and mystical practices or using any kind of mechanical means such as drugs, chanting, or breathing exercises. You know, one would think that advanced meditation would be the way to go, but if we haven't conquered the basics of meditation, what happens when you jump into, let's say, the pool of advanced consciousness? You put yourself in an environment that your physical constitution, physical, emotional, mental, spiritual constitution cannot assimilate, cannot handle, cannot balance itself with the day-to-day life, and the person begins to have mental problems. People who are behind in their consciousness create imbalance in their lives. Imbalance creates friction. Balance is gained by steadily expanding the consciousness. Steadily expanding the consciousness is how we achieve balance. Steadily. It's the key word, steadily. In advancing our consciousness, we do not create imbalance because life is an advancing current. It is in falling behind that we create imbalance and suffering. This is why when you take a meditation course, White Mountain offers many meditation courses. Every single one of those courses at the introductory part says, don't start this course unless you stick with it to the end. The instructions talk about the importance of rhythmic meditation. That means to meditate every day at the same time until the end of the course. Every day at the same time creates a rhythm. The rhythm creates balance and eliminates imbalance and eliminates suffering, but particularly imbalance. A person undergoing the process of refinement of their consciousness does not use methods of aggression, does not engage in competitive exercises or just a competitive life, nor do they engage in methods of superiority. This is a person that's undergoing the process of refinement. So that tells us that on the other side of things, on the other side of the coin, that methods of aggression, methods of living a life of competition and superiority goes against the principles of expanding our consciousness and living in the intuitional or higher worlds, supramundane worlds. A person who is involved in separatism and fanaticism eventually produces a poison that kills all the seeds of creativity and beauty in their consciousness. It is interesting that such a consciousness kills literally or figuratively in the name of love. He or she brings darkness in the name of light, enslaves people in the name of freedom, and takes from people in the name of generosity. When your consciousness expands, you become aware not only when you are awake, but also when you are asleep. Consciousness is not only awareness, but also the ability to control and direct and to create. Control, direct, and create. It is not only self-awareness, but also an awareness of your environment. A limited consciousness is known by the following signs. It is separative. This is what limited consciousness. People who have a limited consciousness, they have a life full of prejudice and superstition. They are fanatic in their behavior. Their personality life, they have only one or 2 points of view. They do not want to analyze an opposing viewpoint, and they are occupied with self-interest and vanity. It does not care, the person does not care for the rights of other people. And typically such a consciousness is controlled by fear. These are just the short list of one who has a limited consciousness. So earlier I said that the human soul is the core of our consciousness. Once we understand that as a fact, then we will understand that our consciousness operates even after our brain or even after our mind is out of operation. In death and in a coma, the consciousness is still in operation. In trance, in dreams, in deep meditation, the consciousness is in operation. There is no time and no condition in which your consciousness stops functioning. It may be limited, it may be delayed, but it is still functioning. The teaching explains that in certain cases, our soul will leave our body to function in other fields in which our soul is karmically tied, while the person in the physical world remains unconscious. And unconscious in this situation is with the capital U, not the little u, but the capital U. When the soul finishes his job in other fields, he then returns to his present body and is back with his consciousness. Sometimes the soul leaves his body and the body has no consciousness. In such a case, the body can live another 4 to 5 years and then it will disintegrate. I know you have questions about this, and maybe someday we can even have a full hour talk on this. It's so, and I'm going to share a couple of more ideas about this, so let me repeat this, just so you can take it home and think about it. Sometimes the soul leaves his body and the body has no consciousness. That's the first point. If this happens, the body can live, but only for another 4 or 5 years, and then it disintegrates. I said earlier that consciousness is the electric light field that holds all these bodies, the etheric, physical, emotional, and mental, together, and supplies the energy field in which they function. When the body has no consciousness, the person begins to lose his or her energy and can fall into various difficult situations, including where entities can take over his or her body. So by now we understand that consciousness is the light of our soul, but if our soul is trapped in guilt, in crimes, in base habits, we can slowly weaken ourselves and fall into unconscious states. The little u, lowercase u. It is then the soul is forced to withdraw and separate for some reason. However, this is the good news. The human soul can be called back to the body by constant prayer and through strong willpower. Or if the person is advanced, they can leave the body while their body lays in a coma and later return to the body. Or as the teaching explains, it is also possible that the soul incarnates somewhere else and he is not interested in his former bodies, or he was not supposed to be born and is forced to reincarnate by unidentified forces. And I'm going to repeat this because this is another point that you probably are not aware of. If the person is advanced, they can leave their body while their body lays in a coma and then later returns to the body. I mean, we've read stories about sages that are able to do this. But the teaching also says that it is possible that the soul incarnates someplace else and he is not interested in returning to his former bodies, or he was not supposed to be born and is forced to reincarnate by unidentified forces. So let me end with this. A coworker asked this question: do we have the same consciousness in the next life as we had in the past? The answer to his question via the teaching was this: you start with the light that you had in the past, but your chalice had many wisdom experiences that your consciousness can use. Also, what we call the memory units, which are your permanent atoms, will be available to you after the fourth initiation. The consciousness is accumulative, but not the contents. The consciousness is accumulative, but not the contents. The light of your soul increases, but the elements on the screen of your consciousness can drop away. The consciousness, the contents of the consciousness are the accumulations in one life, but the contents are accumulated in the permanent atoms forever. The chalice is the accumulation of wisdom from experiences and lasts until the fourth initiation. The permanent atoms are the registrar for the consciousness. The consciousness can use the contents if it has access to them. So let me close by this. It might help to explain. First of all, if you can just imagine the chalice, it's probably easier to imagine a lotus flower. And as the teaching has many images of this lotus flower, we know that the lotus has 12 petals. We also know that there is a jewel in the lotus. And surrounding the lotus are the permanent atoms. So as we go from one incarnation to the next, as the consciousness has a need, each incarnation, as our consciousness has a need, it can be fed the contents of storage that were in the permanent atoms, as well as from the lotus itself. Now, what happens with the permanent atom is that everything is recorded in those permanent atoms. Only what is pure and beautiful and purposeful is recorded and stored until the fourth initiation in the lotus or in the chalice. So we come back each incarnation and we have to construct our consciousness. We have to construct our soul. And as that light increases, that means our consciousness is expanding. And that expansion can take place by being fed from the chalice, or being fed from the permanent atoms, or by receiving straight knowledge. I know we have some time left. So in other words, the chalice is the treasury of our consciousness, and it can use the treasury for any need it has access to it. So let me go back, and I want to read this, which I know you have questions about. It is also possible that the soul incarnates someplace else. This is why the teaching tells us, don't fool around with advanced meditative exercises. Don't fool around with Kundalini exercises. Don't force your consciousness to leave its body. Because if you don't know how to bring it back to your body, you are in limbo. Being in limbo might find you wanting to come back to your body, but you can't find it. And you don't know where it is, and you cannot incarnate back into it. And so you begin to look around as a disembodied soul. In other words, you have no form to come back into. And now you're being forced because entities are controlling you and force you to go into a fetus to be born without your permission. So I know it's very heavy, but it's nothing to fear unless you're doing stupid things. So, if you're teaching meditation, if you're teaching to students, you must be strong in disciplining and explaining the discipline to your students of following the instructions of the teaching, following the instructions of meditation. When you start meditation, you don't start meditating an hour at a time. For example, I have a dear friend that used to meditate 3, 4, 5 hours a day, and then began channeling one of the people that we read about, that established the teaching. She was a student in theosophy, an advanced person in theosophy who passed on, and then my friend started channeling her. Now my friend is in her 80s, and she has lost her memory. She has no consciousness. She will not be around for much longer. These things are so serious. It's like, don't channel. Don't be a medium. If you are starting a meditation course, the instruction is don't meditate longer than 5 minutes for at least 5 years. Even an advanced meditation takes you into 15 to 20 years of experience and says don't meditate any longer than 15 minutes a day. Otherwise, imbalance occurs, and the aura begins to leak, and we have cleavages, and the soul escapes from the body and can't find its way back. So I've seen these, I've never had the experience, thank you God, but I've had friends and co-workers that have gone through these experiences, and it's horrible. It's horrible. Not just on their soul, for their soul, but their family and friends. So I think that will cover it. Here's one. Sometimes the soul leaves its body and the body has no consciousness. In such a case, the body can live another 4 or 5 years and then disintegrates. What happens in a situation like that is entities come into the body and use it. I mean, these are, people who have died and they are caught in the etheric or lower astral plane, and they're so hungry to experience life on Earth that they find bodies like this, oftentimes in hospitals, mental health institutions. You'll find bodies that have no soul. They're just, a form. And so you'll have entities that will come in and live, just take over the aura of that physical body, and then it will leave. And then others will come in until finally they've used up the physical body. The physical body has decomposed and then it will die. So do you have any questions? We have about 2 or 3 minutes if you have questions. I'll be glad to try to answer them. Any questions online? No? No questions. Okay, I'm off the hook.